Now, welcome to another classic view from the boundary from Test Match Special. I'm Jonathan Agnew. During the Ashes series of 2015, we saw some truly remarkable cricket. Who could forget Stuart Broad's 8 for 15 as Australia were bowled out for 60 on that amazing morning at Trent Bridge. In the commentary box, we were treated to some wonderful guests over the course of that summer as well. Sir Sam Mendes is one of Britain's greatest filmmakers, an Oscar winner many times over for his work on films such as American Beauty, Road to Perdition, and of course 2 films in the James Bond series. The second of these 007 works, Spectre, was to be released later in 2015. But Sir Sam was able to take some time away from the edit suite to join us during the second Ashes test at Lord's. He began by telling me about his cricket playing days.
I would say it was brilliant. I was a good schoolboy cricketer. I loved it. It was the thing I was best at school. I wasn't academically very strong at school, and it gave me a kind of identity at school in the way that often being good at one particular sport does. I was captain of cricket for a couple of years. The last 2 years I was at school, I played Oxfordshire Colts, so I was a decent schoolboy cricketer, and certainly as an off-break bowler, which I was, took a lot of wickets. I think if you're a decent spinner at schoolboy level, I think you'd take a lot of wickets.
Bowl straight, bowl full,
exactly.
Hit the wickets.
And just I got a lot of people caught at mid-off and mid-on, but that kind of disappeared when I went to Cambridge. I went determined to play cricket and then discovered theatre, parties, girls, etc., and I got slightly distracted, and I never really was any good. But then there was a brief flourish, I have to say. About 15 years ago, I started playing quite regularly across a couple of summers for my local village team, for Shipton under Wychwood, and we got to the final of the village knockout. And because the very first at Lord's this was, and because my very first visit to Lord's had been for that, weirdly, that same game, it felt like everything had come full circle. Yes. And from that moment, it felt like I'd sort of come to the end of my, intense playing days. And now I play maybe 4 or 5 times a summer if I'm lucky.
But you played in the final, didn't you?
I did.
What were your memories of that? In the dressing rooms, they treat you. It's a proper, proper match here.
Yes, and we were in the
England
dressing room, which was a great thrill. Okay. But unfortunately, it was, of all things, the day that Princess Diana died, and it was one of the strangest and saddest days. Well, I can remember. It was very overcast, and I think if we'd been playing a day later, they would have cancelled the game, but they didn't really know what to do. So the whole day was played under this terrible cloud. So it was quite a strange occasion. And we lost, which was sad, but I think people weren't really understandably focused on the game.
No. But you chose your spot in the England dressing room. I mean, you remember walking in there and all that
by the window. I wanted to be by the window.
Yeah. But it's amazing to be in there, isn't it? Don't you think? You feel. You can't help but feel the tradition of the game when you're in that Lord's Pavilion.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to describe to those who don't love the game, and also those who don't understand the very subtle differences between grounds, why this place feels slightly different. When I was a schoolboy, I came a couple of times on my own. I must have been 12 or 13, and to county games. I used to come during the course of summer. And I remember sneaking into the old grandstand and climbing over the metal railings that led to the boxes and spending a whole day alone in a grandstand box watching. And I remember it quite clearly. It was Middlesex, Worcestershire, and it was the Glenn Turner era of Worcestershire.
Oh, right, okay.
And he was batting beautifully, and he made a century that day. And I just remember sitting alone and watching it and being absolutely perfectly happy.
Yeah.
And it's a real golden memory of my childhood. So to come back to the ground that has that personal significance, on top of which the historical significance, really, it always gives me a thrill.
Have you moved with the times? I mean, you've got very romantic, your eyes were very misty-eyed there with Glenn Turner and Lords and how it was, and I remember that old grandstand very well. It's where I've watched my first match here, actually. Is your cricket sort of based in that sort of time, or have you moved with it?
I am misty-eyed to some degree, because I think when you first fall in love with the game, that forms your central experience in a way. And I don't work in the game in the way that you do, so I don't see it daily.
No.
And I feel like the love was formed during that period, 76, 77, 78, so the Braley Ashes of 77. I have a very, very powerful memory of Randall's innings in the centenary test in Melbourne.
Listening to it, were you, on the radio?
I was, yeah.
I was there. I was listening with it too at school.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that was really
Alan McGilvray and all those amazing voices.
And Lily in his pomp still, and Rob Marsh, and and Greg Chappell, and that was a special time, and so that the Braley boycott Botham era was my the beginning of my love for the game. I do think what's happened in the last 10 years is astonishing, and I think it's fantastic for the game. It is very, very tricky because social media, as you well know, has introduced a whole area which is very, very difficult, I think, to navigate for the players particularly.
In what way?
Well, I think that there's just too much direct contact with its audience. I think that they need to learn a way to wall themselves off from the media and from the public, and I think it's almost impossible now. I mean, I speak as a filmmaker. You're constantly being bombarded by opinions, particularly if you're doing something like I'm doing at the moment, which is a Bond movie. You're constantly being bombarded with opinion, and I wish it was more like this, more like that, and you have to sort of find a way to strategically remove yourself.
Not be swayed by it.
Yeah, because it does have a real impact on you. You read something the day that you shoot a scene. I hope this one's got more jokes in it, or I hope it's got less jokes in it, whatever it is. And however strong you are affected by that. And I think that it's taken me 30 years of experience in theatre and film to learn how to cut myself off from that. And I think these guys are 21, 22. They know nothing except social media.
How do you cut yourself off from it?
You just don't read it. Don't read it. And you have to be strong because it's so easily available. And it's not just social media, it's the newspapers and it's the television, and you have to go through a sort of detox period, and wean yourself off it so that you can concentrate. And I think that has really affected it. And I think that the KP saga is a good example of that. That, it was fought out on Twitter and the pages of the newspapers and, YouTube and the art of direct communications. It was almost seemed to be the last thing that was considered, was actually sitting down and talking about it, between people. And it was all based on text messages that were supposedly sent to something. I mean, it's absolutely unnecessary and very, very difficult to manage. I think you'll see as people become more used to social media that they become better at managing it. But I think what we've been present in the last 10, 15 years is simultaneously the explosion in 2020 cricket combined with the explosion in social media, which both very, very new, and I think it really has made some shockwaves.
Yes, interesting. I mean, the T20 though you like. I mean, the hard, fast entertainment.
I love it. Look, Test cricket, of course, is the thing that I love the most, as any true cricket fan, I believe, must do. But for me, the way that Test cricket is being played has changed. Because of the developments in the game, and it's changed for the better. I look at a player like Steve Smith or a player like Ben Stokes, and they're looking to score off every ball. The intent is there. And the era where I fell in love with the game was a completely different.
70s,
they were waiting,
tedious sometimes,
waiting for runs.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a very interesting. I wonder if you know this stat. Actually, this is where I
doubt it.
I really prove my geekness, which is that as a reader of many Frindle scorebooks of the 70s and early 80s, Jeff Boycott, a man close to your heart, batted in the 78-79 series, which was, let's face it, not an exciting series. It was a 6-match series, and it was the Packer era, so it was a very denuded Australian team. But he faced more balls than any other player in the England team in that series. He faced over 1,100 balls. How many boundaries do you think he scored?
Well, I've got a bit of a stat that I think this is involved as well, because I know that at one period, I think it was on that tour, he went 530 something balls without hitting a single boundary.
Yeah.
And that wasn't obviously in one game, but there was a string of that. So that, I think, is in the same run. So I'm going to go 4.
6. 6 boundaries.
It's appalling, isn't it?
In 1,100 balls. Now, it didn't seem... It is quite appalling, yes. But
you think you'd nick one that flew down through third man, wouldn't you?
How can you not score a boundary? You look at it now, and you'd be disappointed if even Alistair Cook, who was hardly a dasher, went 100 balls without scoring 6 boundaries, let alone 1,100. Yeah. And, the game is just totally shifted. Now, there wasn't anything particularly strange about that. I mean, Boycott had a bad series, even by his standards, in terms of boundary hitting. But, you had Gower and Botham, and they were hitting 20 boundaries in a series, And that is completely changed. And I think that's largely down to 2020. And I just think it's very, very exciting now. And the speed at which, look, the game is always perpetually full of potential. This has not been by anyone's normal standards, a particularly exciting test for a day and a half, first day and a half. But what happened last night, although bad for an England fan, was it's suddenly thrilling.
Yeah.
And that the speed at which it changes and the speed at which a batsman can take control of the game, like Stokes against New Zealand or Root at Cardiff, you're talking about people changing matches in an hour. A test match could be turned around in an hour. And I only witnessed that happening maybe 2 or 3 times in the whole of my test cricket experience up to that point, yes. Which was, let's say Botham in 81. He came in at Old Trafford, which for me was the great innings of that series. And, Tavares scored, 10 runs while he scored 120. And he totally changed the game in an hour. And I think that is happening almost once or twice a test match now. Yeah. And that makes the game of test cricket for me much more exciting.
Yeah. Is it accessible enough, Sam? I was looking at some figures today that suggested actually the open goal from the BBC figures down, cricket on Sky down about 200,000. I mean, when you and I were watching and falling in love with cricket, yeah. We were there watching when Mike is a flickering black and white set. And watching them and looking at our heroes and developing heroes and a love for the game that I suspect a lot of people now haven't got. Do you think that's an issue?
I'm afraid I think it is an issue, yeah. And I think that there are some areas the game has to look at itself a little bit. I think personally, today you see that the pavilion at Lord's is full, but yes. I remember having a quiet go at Roger Knight, who was then chairman of the MCC or president. I can't remember.
Chief exec.
Yeah. a couple of years ago, about the fact that it was an Ashes test match and the pavilion was half full. And he said, well, that's the members, they come when they want to. And I said, that's not acceptable, I don't think, because if you're a young person watching at home and you're being told this is the greatest game in the history of cricket, or the historically the greatest game, and behind a bowler's arm the stand is half full, it doesn't make sense. You have to find a way to try and get over that. So I think there are areas where there is still a discrepancy between the tradition of the game and what it wants to be. And I was scouting for Skyfall. One of the places we considered was India, and I went to Mumbai, and I toured 15 years earlier with the Gaieties, actually, with Harold Pinter's team as a player, as an amateur player, and I hadn't been back. The place was utterly transformed, and I went to a 2020 game. Tendulkar was playing at Mumbai, and it was completely
indescribable.
Yes. It was a totally different experience, and I thought this is what's happening to the game, and we have to try and find a way to ride that wave in this country specifically.
I think it's possible. I think English people do watch cricket in that way, with that sort of passion that just explodes amongst the. If you've been to one of those full houses at Wankhede, presumably, could you really generate that atmosphere here in England, do you think?
No, I don't think you can. I don't think the grounds are made for it. I think they're smaller. Somehow, the watching of cricket is a slightly more polite enterprise in this country. But I think that we failed to capitalise on 2020 when it was really emerging. And I don't think still the structure of the game domestically is properly organised. So you don't feel there's a Big Bash or an IPL. There isn't a section of the season that's given over to it. And so, there's just this jumble of matches. And every year I try and I follow cricket, and I can't keep up with the domestic season and how the 2020s are interspersed with whatever one-day competition is now being suggested, plus the county championship. And have we really got space in this country for that many county teams? Of course nobody wants to see any of those counties go out of business, but surely there's a way of combining some of them, combining resources, still playing at those grounds, but maybe not so much every year, and having a northeast and a north, or whatever it is, something closer to the Sheffield Shield, so that you feel like there's a much higher standard across the game. And I think that kind of oversight for the domestic game is something that really is necessary and needed now, and I think we miss it in this country.
I was chatting to Simon Hughes about you, Sam. I know you know pretty well, and he mentioned the fact that surely I would imagine. Apart from Squeezing the Orange, the finest cricket book ever written was The Art of Captaincy by Mike Brearley, which I think has been quite an influence in your life, hasn't it? In terms of taking it with you and using the example, particularly that Mike talks about, of dealing with people. You sort of crossed the bridge into your own world with that.
I wrote a foreword for the previous edition. I think he's just republished it, actually. For me, it's one of the great sporting books, and as I said earlier, Brearley was my was my era,
Yes.
and I grew up kind of idolising him. And not just the Art of Captaincy, but the books he wrote about the Three Ashes series that he played in are incredible books and really deserve to be reprinted as well. And for me, it's about more than just cricket captaincy. It's about leadership. It's about reading players, about unifying disparate talents into one team, which I think, for example, since Braille, there have been very, very few examples of English captains who've been able to do that. And Michael Vaughan would be, for
Yes.
me, the last time I felt a captain was able to control such a disparate bunch.
Yes, really galvanise them as a unit. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, there isn't an enormous difference between sporting leadership and directing. And I said that in my foreword, and I've said it to Mike since, which is that you are trying to make everyone. Directing is a very solitary profession in which your job is mainly to create a team underneath you. You're standing on the shoulders of many, many other people, and to try and make them all work and create the same thing and work towards the same goal seems to me almost one of the chief achievements, if you've managed to do it at the end of a movie or a play. And that's not that dissimilar to sporting leadership, certainly in cricket terms. And by the way, one of the ways I learned to exert authority as a young person and to exert my influence subtly over people was captaining a cricket team. It was the first time anyone had given me any authority. And so I spent time captaining a club side, many of whom were much older than me, and learning how to give them some form of instruction without feeling patronised or
really interesting.
Or bossed around, suggesting things, cajoling, understanding everyone needs something different from the captain, everyone needs something different from a director. Every actor is different, every technician is different, every cinematographer is different, and that's really your goal. A lot of it is reading other people. And so for me, Brearley was the master of that as a cricket captain. Everyone knows this, but in 1981 he made absolutely no impact at all with the bat. No. But he made an enormous impact on the series, and you could argue that he turned it around by giving both them the confidence, giving the players the confidence they needed to go out and play as they really felt. And that's something that I felt Vaughan did very brilliantly. And I think there's obviously, there's been a big turnaround in the English camp at the moment with Cook and with Trevor Bayliss, that somehow Flower made them, for whatever reason, feel cramped, feel stifled. They didn't go out and play the natural game, and you had a team full of fantastically entertaining cricketers, KP being amongst them, going out in the 2009, 2010 era, or maybe 11. It was more like 2011, wasn't it? Playing quite dull cricket for a couple of years. And I think that all came from the way that, the leadership positioned itself behind the scenes. And you also had a captain, Cook, who had never exerted authority over any team, and struck me as exactly the sort of person, in club cricket, you go into the changing room and there's the one quiet boy in the corner who is just going to get on with it and score the runs. And he doesn't really mix, and he goes home early and maybe has a half at the end of the game, and he doesn't really put himself around, and he's very contained. And that felt like who Cook was. And to turn that figure around and to give him the confidence when he's taking over a team that he's already seen being led brilliantly by Andrew Strauss, with a lot of characters in it, the Swans and the Broads and the what have you. I think that took him a long time, but he's got it now, and you can see his body language on the field is different, the way he treats the media is different. He's much more confident about not saying things, which of course is something that I find very impressive, because I think dealing with the media is half the job in that, of a captain. Obviously, the rest of it's out on the field.
It'll be your job for a while now, won't it, dealing with the media? My word. I mean, it's great timing. The fact it was only yesterday, I think, that this latest Bond film, Spectre, was the announcement was going to be released on October the 26th, which you obviously knew ages ago, but we were very excited last night when we saw this pop up. But I mean, are you excited about this? How does it feel to be almost there as far as what must be a massive project is concerned? I'm talking about Mike Brearley's team. Okay, well, it's only 11 blokes. I mean, how many are in your team, for goodness sake?
Yes, I counted them when we were up for a BAFTA last year. I accept it on behalf of everybody. And I counted them up myself, and there were over 1,000.
Really?
And you really do feel it. And this is a bigger movie than Skyfall. It's shot in more places. We were in Mexico City and Tangier and Northern Sahara and Rome and the Alps and London. We shut down great sections of London, and anyone listening who was whose evening was ruined because of the traffic around Westminster Bridge over the last few weeks, I apologise to them. But it's been an enormous undertaking, and it feels very. I think one of the most rewarding moments as a film director is when you finally finish shooting. It kind of starts all over again when you're editing. I mean,
yes.
You direct the movie really 4 times, when it's being written, when it's being cast and prepped, when it's being shot, and then when it's being edited and music is being added, and that the 4th stage is just beginning.
So your hands really are all over it from start to finish as director, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you're any good as a director, you want to be all over every department. You want to be influencing everything. It's your film, it's your vision, and unlike the theatre, which I learned a lot of my craft, I don't think theatre is a director's medium, but I think film is, and I think you can pretty much blame the director if you're having a bad evening at the cinema. But because I think at the end of the day, it does fall on his shoulders.
Yeah. A British brass band playing down there. So, but the great British tradition, Bond, though, isn't it? I mean, is that? I guess you have to really grasp that, do you? And say, this is fantastic. Wow, what an opportunity. I mean, it'd be quite easy to be, I suppose, quite cowed by the fact that you're moving this incredible tradition on in a newish direction, are you? I mean, the last film, Skyfall, was viewed as being a bit grittier, maybe, than the other ones, perhaps? Yeah,
I mean, I made the movie I wanted to see, and I think I've done the same thing this time. I hope I've done the same thing this time, although it really is just emerging out of the mists in the way that it does in the editing period. I think that you have to
go again. So, I mean, you talk about editing it now, but have you really not got it almost in your mind absolutely how it's going to go, or can you be swayed in various ways while you're editing it?
I think narratively, in terms of the story, yes, it's pretty much set out. But as any director will tell you, how you tell the story is everything, and the story itself is not enough. And so I spent a long period with music for the movie, which is 100 minutes of music for this film. It's a lot of music, and there's a lot of visual effects, and there's a lot of sound work, and there's any number of ways that you can mess your film up, even at this late stage, however good the story is. So you have to stay completely focused, and it is like kind of rebooting and starting again. It's much more pleasurable for me. I love editing. It's the best part of it, because you've done really the hard work, and then you're into the thing I enjoy the most, which is the storytelling. And that's I was 15, 20 years telling stories in the theatre, and in that respect it's when it becomes the most similar to that. But for me, the Bond franchise as a whole has been a wonderful unexpected gift at this point in my life, because it's not just the making of the film, it's the relationship you suddenly have with an audience, it's the dialogue you have from the beginning of the process to the end, because you have to embrace the fact that everything you do is going to be reviewed and debated, from the title to the music to the casting to the trailer to the
social
poster.
Media will be all over it.
Everything.
Sam. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
do you think you know Ian Fleming?
Do you
think you know him?
I think I know him a little bit better, having read all the books again.
Yes.
But he's a very unknowable figure. There's a great mystery, and I think one of the reasons why the books sustain is that figure of Bond, there's a core of mystery there and a core of darkness, which is always slightly out of reach, but keeps you drawn forward. He feels like a very unknowable figure ultimately, and that's why I think so many different actors, so many different versions of the character exist, because you feel like he can go in almost any direction. There's a sort of neutrality somewhere. There's a mystery at the core, which I think is very enticing. And it felt, for me, my way into the whole thing was Daniel Craig.
Yes.
I had cast Daniel Craig in a movie I made in Chicago about 15 years ago called Road to Perdition, and it was his first big American film. And then, the role of Bond came up 4 or 5 years later, and I was called by Entertainment Weekly, by a showbiz publication, and they said, your old friend and collaborator Daniel Craig's been suggested as Bond. What do you think? And I said, it's a terrible idea.
Really?
He shouldn't do it. And then, because for me at the time, I thought Bond had become, the opposite of what Daniel was, kind of slightly disengaged, urbane, jokey, eyebrow-raising, a pastiche in a way.
Yeah.
And I felt Daniel's reality and his passion and his sort of honesty as an actor would not work in that. But of course, what happened is the franchise and the character adapted to work with Daniel. And so then I saw Casino Royale and I thought, what a fantastic piece of casting. And it was that got me reinterested in Bond as a movie, as movies.
And do you write and create and edit for him? I mean, could you do it with anybody as James Bond, or how much is Daniel Craig the central to what we're going to see in October?
It's completely central, actually, and that relationship with Daniel, artistically and on the floor, is the centre of everything. And I think if it comes from that, very, very, I mean, particularly on the second movie, I think we had a much harder time physically on this film. It was much longer, much more tricky locations. I had much more second unit work, so I had 2 units shooting, and I could only be in one place, obviously. So I'd often be, in Mexico and watching footage being shot in the Alps,
right.
For example, which is, that's a real mind-bending, operation, balancing 2 different parts of the movie at the same time. But even though it was hard, it was much more fun because there was much more trust. I felt much more trust from everyone around me, the crew, and from Daniel, because we'd done it before and had a good time,
Yeah. Well, worth. I mean, how much can you say about it? How much can you give away to our loyal audience? We've been talking all these Bond films today because we thought actually what a great James Bond Jeff Boycott would make. Could you create a Bond movie starring Jeffrey Boycott and Miss Moneypenny? Do you think it's possible?
I think Sir Geoffrey might be a fine Bond villain. But someone said to me, they're riffing about Bond titles that might be appropriate for Boycott as Bond.
Yes.
And I think of social media. I think a little campaign, Boycott should be Bond. I think you should launch that. But there is one, isn't there? Dr. No.
Yes. Dr. No Run, I think it was.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, and I think...
but the music, the song is sung and credit. I mean, you can't say anything about that.
No, I can't. I'm sorry to frustrate you, but I can say that the song's been recorded and it's fantastic, and I'm very excited about it. It's not much, but it's something.
Yes.
You won't have to wait long. That's
Blofeld. I mean, we've got Henry with.
There's only one Blofeld for me, and he's dressed in a mustard suit, and he's sitting right behind me. But I believe. Is it not the case that there is some relationship between the Blofelds and the Flemings? Isn't that?
Yeah, my father and Ian were at school together, and he named a number of his villains after people he didn't particularly get on with at school. Although when he Ernst Stavro and his White Cat appeared for the first time, didn't they, in Thunderball, and Ian and my father exchanged letters very good-humouredly, which I think is still my nephew or my brother have still got.
Really?
And I met Ian, in fact, in the West Indies on my first honeymoon in Jamaica, and I was staying at Ocheris at Jamaica Inn, and he rang up because I'd met him in Bulls in London, club belonged to, and he said, "Come to lunch." We went to lunch, and he told me the lovely story of before lunch we were standing outside Goldeneye, which then was very ramshackle and run down.
Right.
And he said, "I don't think I ever told you how Ernst Stavro came into being." And I said, "No, you didn't." He said, "Well, I started to write a book after dinner, having had dinner at home one night. And it became published as Thunderball." He said, "I wanted early on evil name, and I couldn't think of one." And he said, "I went to bed scratching my head, which isn't always the best way of getting to sleep, and woke up in the morning and still couldn't think of one, and caught a taxi to my club and sat gratefully in a leather armchair, picked up the membership list, and thumbed through it alphabetically looking for an evil name. And when I got to the B's, I was confronted by a phalanx of 3 Blofelds. And he said, in his own words, he said, "I slammed the book shut, gave a yelp of delight, ordered a pint of champagne, and never looked back."
That's a fantastic
there
story.
it is.
So you're directly related?
Directly related. My uncle...
To the greatest supervillain in history?
But none of my family have ever owned a white cat, I don't think.
Well, that's just,
But at that lunch,
Right,
I must
lunch.
quickly say before we go on, the principal guest, about 20 people in the garden, was Noel Coward.
Wow.
So that's another story.
That's not a bad series of names to drop, is
No,
it?
it's not. Could you do another? I mean, it must be such a massive project. This. Could you imagine there is another Bond movie after this one? I know it hasn't come out yet, but.
I said no to the last one and then ended up doing it and was, pilloried by all my friends, including Atherton, who's taken great pleasure in reminding me that I said no to the last one and ended up doing it. But I do think this is probably it. I think 5 years, for the two movies, and it feels now almost, even though we've only just finished shooting it, like one big experience, and it was a fantastic, life-changing thing. But I don't think I could go down that road again. It really is, it's more a lifestyle choice than a job. I mean, you do have to put everything else on hold.
So you have done nothing in the meantime, really, apart from have just totally dedicated.
I did a production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that's still running at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane between the two. But I spent a couple of years before doing Skyfall planning and helping to write that, or help supervising the writing of that. So that was something that overlapped. But no, it's pretty much all encompassing.
And live, I want one of these enormous theatrical productions that you've done, live on stage, as opposed to, the red carpet display that there'll be no doubt for this. Does live get you more? The live performance?
Yes, I think that the places that I'm happiest rehearsing a play or editing a movie. And I think that when I've finished a movie, I generally, want to be back in a theatre environment again. It feels like home. It feels controllable after the chaos of a movie set. But it won't be long before I want to do another film. And I'm very, very fortunate to be able to go back and forth between the two.
Well, wasn't that a fascinating insight into the world of filmmaking? Sir Sam Mendes kept his word and has handed over the reins of directing the James Bond series. He's been busy, though, directing the brilliant 1917 that won 3 Oscars in 2020.